The rejection hit him before the elevator doors even closed, a quiet certainty sinking into his chest as he tightened his grip on the worn folder in his hand and stared at the polished marble floor that reflected a man who looked older than his years. The interview room behind him still smelled of expensive coffee and success, but all he carried out was the familiar weight of failure, the kind that single parents learn to swallow silently because there is no time to fall apart when a child is waiting at home. He took a breath that felt too small for his lungs and stepped into the corridor, unaware that this moment, the one that felt like the end, was about to become the turning point of his entire life. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and unseen miracles that arrive when hope feels gone, please take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to channel name, because stories like this exist to remind us that humanity still matters. He had woken up that morning before sunrise, the city still wrapped in darkness, to pack his daughter's lunch with careful hands and rehearse answers in his head while the kettle boiled. Being a single father had taught him discipline and endurance, but it had also carved deep lines of exhaustion into his face that no suit could hide. The interview was for a position he was overqualified for on paper but desperately needed in reality, a role at a company whose name alone carried power, stability, and the promise of healthcare coverage that would ease the constant fear sitting at the back of his mind. He had walked into the building with a quiet prayer and walked out feeling like he had let his daughter down, even though she would never say such a thing. As he crossed the lobby, the sound of his shoes echoed too loudly, each step amplifying the thoughts he tried to silence. The interviewers had been polite but distant, their smiles professional and their questions sharp, circling the gap in his resume where life had forced him to choose hospital rooms over boardrooms. He knew that honesty had cost him, that speaking about nights spent caring for a feverish child instead of chasing promotions did not fit neatly into corporate expectations. Yet he also knew he could not apologize for loving his daughter enough to put her first, even if the world seemed to punish him for it. Outside, the air was colder than he expected, the kind of cold that seeps through thin coats and settles in the bones. He paused on the steps, unfolding the rejection email on his phone that had arrived faster than he thought possible, its carefully chosen words confirming what his instincts already knew. He did not curse or cry, he simply closed his eyes for a moment and leaned into the familiar ache of disappointment, calculating how many extra shifts he could take, which bills could wait, and how to turn another no into a lesson his daughter would never have to see. What he did not know was that high above him, in a glass-walled office overlooking the city, the billionaire CEO of the company was standing perfectly still, watching the security feed replay the end of that interview. The CEO had built an empire on numbers, strategy, and risk, but something about the way the man walked out had pierced through years of carefully constructed detachment. It was not the failure itself that caught his attention, it was the dignity with which it was carried, the subtle slump of shoulders that spoke of responsibility rather than defeat. The CEO had asked for the interview recording out of curiosity, expecting nothing more than confirmation that the hiring process was efficient. Instead, he found himself listening to answers that were not rehearsed but lived, hearing a story of sacrifice and resilience that reminded him uncomfortably of his own beginnings, back when success was not guaranteed and every opportunity felt like a lifeline. The decision to pass on the candidate had been logical, approved by a panel, justified by metrics, yet it left a sour taste that refused to fade. As the single father walked down the street toward the bus stop, the city rushed around him, indifferent and relentless, a reminder that life does not slow down for personal crises. He thought about his daughter's smile when he promised to pick her up early that evening, about the way she believed in him with a faith that felt both comforting and heavy. He did not see the sleek black car pull up behind him or hear the hurried footsteps approaching until a voice called out, not with authority, but with urgency that cut through the noise. The CEO had not planned to run after anyone that day. He had not planned to break protocol, to question his own systems, or to act on something as intangible as a feeling. Yet there he was, coat unbuttoned, heart pounding in a way it had not in years, realizing that leadership meant more than signing off on decisions, it meant owning them, especially when they were wrong. He watched the man turn, surprise flickering across his tired face, and in that instant understood that success without humanity was an empty victory. What followed was not a dramatic speech or an instant transformation, but a quiet recognition of worth that had been missing from the interview room. The CEO listened, truly listened, as the single father explained his situation without embellishment or plea, just facts shaped by necessity. He spoke of learning time management through bedtime routines, of developing crisis skills in emergency rooms, of leadership practiced in the small, daily acts of showing up. These were not bullet points on a resume, but they were the foundations of character. The decision to offer him a second chance was not charity, it was respect. The CEO saw potential not as something polished and perfect, but as something forged in hardship, something that could not be taught in business schools. He extended an opportunity that came with mentorship, flexibility, and the understanding that life did not pause for work, but work should sometimes make room for life. For the single father, it felt unreal, like the world had tilted just enough to let light in where there had only been shadows. In the weeks that followed, the change was not instant or easy. Balancing a new role with parenting demanded every ounce of energy he had, but the environment he stepped into was different from what he had known before. It was a place where his story was not a liability but a strength, where empathy was valued alongside efficiency. The CEO did not hover or interfere, but he paid attention, learning as much from this man's perseverance as the man learned from the resources now at his disposal. At home, the difference showed in small but profound ways. There was less tension in the air, fewer late-night calculations whispered into the dark, more laughter at the dinner table. His daughter noticed the shift even if she did not fully understand it, sensing that her father stood a little taller, smiled a little more freely. He made sure she knew that the opportunity he had been given was not magic, but the result of kindness meeting persistence at the right moment. The story spread quietly within the company, not as gossip, but as an example of what leadership could look like when courage replaced complacency. It reminded people that behind every resume was a human being carrying invisible battles, and that sometimes the most valuable assets were those shaped by adversity. The CEO found himself changed as well, more attuned to the impact of his decisions, more willing to question processes that overlooked the human cost. Years later, when the single father stood in a position of stability he once thought impossible, he never forgot the day he walked away believing he had failed. He taught his daughter that rejection was not a verdict, but a redirection, that dignity mattered even when doors closed, and that kindness, though rare, could alter the course of a life. He carried that lesson into his work, becoming a leader who recognized potential in places others ignored. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of a moment when you needed a second chance or were brave enough to offer one, please take a moment now to like, share, comment, and subscribe to channel name, because your engagement helps stories like this reach those who need them most. Before the ending, I have one special request for you. Please comment below with a single word that represents hope to you, because your words might be exactly what someone else scrolling through needs to see today. In the end, this was not just a story about a job or a billionaire running after a stranger, it was about the quiet power of seeing people for who they are beyond their failures, and the ripple effect that begins when one person chooses empathy over indifference. The single father did not just find a career, he found validation, and the CEO did not just change a life, he rediscovered the purpose behind his success. And somewhere between a closed elevator door and an open street, a moment that felt like an ending became the beginning of something far greater, proving that sometimes the world does bend toward kindness, if only someone is willing to run after it.